They tried to break me, and for a moment, I thought they had succeeded. It wasn't the kind of breaking that comes from a single blow. It was slower, sharper, like glass cracking from the inside, until you wonder if you'll shatter completely. I still remember the exact evening because some words cut so deep that they tattoo themselves into your memory. We were all in the living room, and I had been sitting quietly on the corner chair, the one that had started to feel like a cage more than a seat. My hands were folded in my lap, my back slightly bent, and I thought if I made myself small enough, invisible enough, maybe they wouldn't notice me. But they did. Oh, they noticed. It started with my brother's voice, loud and dismissive. "She's nothing," he said, not even lowering his tone. "She's weak. She doesn't belong here." The words didn't come from a stranger. They came from someone who had once held my hand as a child, someone who had shared meals at the same table, someone I had believed would always protect me. And yet, there he was, cutting me down with sentences that felt like blades. I tried to breathe, but each syllable stole air from my chest. I turned my eyes toward my parents, silently begging them to stop it, to defend me, to say something, anything, that would remind me I still had a place in this family. But my mother stayed silent, her face blank, her eyes avoiding mine as though I were already erased. My father shifted in his chair, restless, but never opened his mouth. And then came the final blow. My cousins, sitting just a few feet away, laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh or a laugh of misunderstanding. It was cruel, deliberate, the kind of laugh that says, "Yes, we agree. She is worthless." That laughter burned me more than the words. It was like watching a fire spread across everything I had ever built, consuming the memories I thought would always keep me warm. I clenched my fingers so tightly that my nails dug into my palms, leaving little crescent marks that stung long after. I wanted to cry, to scream, to demand they take it back, but my throat closed, heavy with the kind of silence that suffocates. And then there was her, my sister. She hadn't said a word, not yet, but I saw her watching. Her eyes locked on mine, not with pity, but with something else, something steady, almost fierce. It was as if she were silently telling me, "Hold on, you're not alone." And in that moment, as broken as I felt, that small spark kept me from collapsing completely. If this story already grips your heart, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It may seem small, but your support helps these stories travel to others who need to hear that they are not alone. I sat frozen in my chair, the room buzzing with their laughter, their dismissive voices circling me like wolves. And yet all I could think of was my sister's gaze. I didn't know then what she was going to do, but I felt it. That quiet storm building inside her, the refusal to let their cruelty stand unchallenged. What they didn't realize was that while they were trying to tear me apart, she was gathering strength. Sometimes it's not the words of many that change the course of a life. It's the silence of one who refuses to stay quiet any longer. That night, they thought they had buried me under their mockery, but what they didn't see was that my sister had been listening all along. And when the moment came, she would reveal something none of them expected. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been pushed so low by words that only someone else's courage lifted you back up? Tell me in the comments, because your story might just be the light someone else is waiting to find. This house once carried my laughter, my cooking, my footsteps moving quickly from the kitchen to the living room, always making sure everything was in its place. I remember the smell of bread rising in the oven, the sound of voices calling my name with excitement, the feeling that I was needed, wanted, central to the rhythm of every day. There was a time when they would gather around the table, waiting for me to serve the meal, their eyes lighting up when I placed the dish in front of them. I can still hear my sister saying, No one cooks like you do. No one makes this house feel like a home the way you do. Those words once wrapped around me like a warm blanket. But slowly, almost too quietly to notice at first, the warmth faded. The same table where I once sat at the head became a place where my chair was pushed to the side. Meals began without me. Plates were filled, conversations were carried, and mine was the only seat left empty or missing a serving. I would step into the kitchen, only to find dishes already cleared, laughter already fading, as if the night had passed me by while I was still standing in the doorway. It wasn't just about food. It was about presence, about belonging. I used to be the one they turned to for advice, the one who settled arguments with reason and calm. I remember one evening years ago when my brother and sister argued about money. Voices were sharp, the tension thick, until I placed a hand on each of their shoulders and said, "We are stronger together than apart. Don't forget who you are to each other." They listened then. They quieted. They valued me. But now, if I speak, my words are brushed aside before they even leave my lips. My daughter-in-law corrects me mid-sentence, as though I'm a child who needs teaching. My granddaughter giggles at my mistakes, her laughter sharp and youthful, but heavy with disdain. And my son? He sits in silence. He hears the disrespect, he feels the chill in the air, but he says nothing. His silence cuts deeper than their words, because once upon a time, he was the little boy who would run into my arms and tell me I was the best mother in the world. I held him through storms of fever, fear, and failure, but now he cannot even hold my gaze. The shift wasn't sudden. It crept in like shadows at dusk. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing. Families get busy, I thought. People grow. Life changes. But the changes were not neutral. They were cold. I stopped being the matriarch and started being the background. A chair in the corner, a shadow in the hall, a figure they walked past instead of walked toward. I went from being the heart of the house to being its ghost. Sometimes I would try to reclaim a piece of myself by baking a pie, the way I used to on Sundays. I'd place it on the counter, waiting for someone to notice. But the pie would sit untouched until eventually it was covered and stored, eaten later without a word of thanks. I remember one particular Sunday when I brought the pie to the table, hoping for that same chorus of joy I once knew. Instead, my daughter-in-law said, "We already have dessert," and pushed the dish aside. My granddaughter whispered something to her cousin, and they laughed under their breath. The sound of their laughter used to make me smile. Now it made me ache. The living room once echoed with my stories, the tales of how their grandfather built the swing in the backyard, of how we struggled, but always pulled through. Those stories kept history alive. But one night, when I tried to share a memory, my brother rolled his eyes. "Stop living in the past," he said. "No one cares." The sting of those 4 words almost made me stop speaking altogether. They weren't just dismissing my stories, they were erasing the proof that I had once mattered. I started noticing how the rooms felt different. The kitchen, once filled with the rhythm of my hands, chopping, stirring, serving, now felt like someone else's domain. The living room, where I had watched generations grow, became a place I was hesitant to enter. Sometimes I'd open the door and see them all gathered on the couch, watching a movie. No one turned their head. No one said, "Come join us." I would close the door as quietly as I had opened it, my heart heavier each time. And yet, the house still carries my fingerprints. The curtains I sewed by hand. The marks on the doorframe where I measured the children's height. The old swing set outside that still sways with the wind, a reminder of days when laughter was ours, not theirs alone. Every corner tells a story of me, but they walk through those same corners blind, as if the walls themselves mean more than the woman who once gave them life within these walls. I am not invisible. I feel every shift, every cold glance, every unfinished sentence. I see how I've gone from being the foundation to being the furniture, useful only until they decide it takes up too much space. And though I remain silent most of the time, inside me burns the memory of who I once was. I was the glue, the strength, the hand that fed and healed. Now I am treated as a shadow. But shadows still carry shape, and one day they might realize that erasing me was never in their power. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It warms my heart to see how far my voice travels, even when inside these walls they act as if it has disappeared. It wasn't one big explosion that destroyed me. It was 1,000 small cuts, each one disguised as harmless, but together they carved into my dignity until I barely recognized myself. The humiliations didn't always come as shouts. Sometimes they came wrapped in laughter. Sometimes they came as silence sharp enough to pierce. And sometimes they came as little corrections and dismissals that told me, louder than words, you don't matter anymore. I remember the first time I truly felt it. I was at the dinner table, my hands trembling slightly as I lifted my fork. I tried to join the conversation, recalling a memory of when the children were younger. Do you remember, I began, my voice warm, the summer when we all went to the lake and you... I didn't even finish before my brother interrupted with a heavy sigh. Stop living in the past. Nobody cares about those old stories. His words dropped like stones, and then came the laughter. Laughter not of joy, but of mockery. My cousins chuckled, my own son smirked, and my daughter-in-law shook her head as if I were a child who had said something foolish. That night I swallowed my food like it was glass. The taste disappeared, and all I could feel was the burn in my throat, the ache in my chest. I wanted to scream, those stories are the reason you exist, the reason this house is built, the reason we are still here together. But my voice stayed trapped behind the walls of my teeth, held down by fear that if I spoke, they'd laugh again. The humiliations came in different shapes. Sometimes it was my clothes. I had always taken pride in dressing neatly, even in old age. My mother used to say, the way you present yourself shows the respect you have for life. But one evening, as I walked into the living room in a carefully pressed blouse, my granddaughter whispered to her cousin, look at her. She still thinks it's Sunday church every day. They giggled, and my son didn't even correct them. I wanted to tell them that respect is not about fabric. It's about carrying yourself with pride even when no one else notices. But the words withered before I could speak. Other times it was my forgetfulness. If I misplaced my glasses or forgot a name, they didn't simply remind me, they weaponized it. My daughter-in-law would roll her eyes. Honestly, how can you not keep track of something so simple? My granddaughter laughed out loud once when I confused 2 television shows. She can't even follow a storyline anymore, she said, and they all joined in the laughter. That moment still burns in me because once upon a time, I was the one who organized their entire lives. I balanced bills, planned meals, remembered birthdays, solved crises. My mind had been a compass for everyone, and now they treated it like a joke. And then there was the silence. Silence can humiliate more than words. When I entered a room and conversation stopped, when eyes shifted away, when no one asked for my opinion, it told me everything I needed to know. I had become furniture. I had become the background. I remember standing in the doorway of the living room one evening, hoping someone would say, "Come sit with us." But the laughter carried on. The movie played, and not one person moved an inch to make space for me. My presence was invisible, and their silence screamed louder than cruelty. But the worst humiliation came from my own son. The boy I raised with love, the boy whose scraped knees I kissed, whose nightmares I soothed, whose future I fought for. He became the man who said nothing when they mocked me. I could endure the others, perhaps, but his silence, that was a knife. Each time he chose to stay quiet, he told me without words that I wasn't worth defending. And for a mother, that silence is heavier than death. I remember one evening vividly. I was trying to help, fold laundry, wanting to feel useful. My hands are not as quick as they once were, but I folded each shirt neatly. My daughter-in-law snatched one from my hands and said coldly, "You're just getting in the way." She didn't whisper it, she said it in front of everyone. The room went silent. I froze, waiting for someone, anyone, to defend me. My son didn't. My granddaughter looked down. My brother cleared his throat and changed the subject. No one spoke, and in that silence I heard the truth. They all agreed. I cannot describe the feeling of being reduced, day after day, into something less than human. I wasn't the woman who held them together, who sacrificed, who carried generations forward. I was now an inconvenience, a burden, a shadow. They didn't see my years of strength. They saw only weakness. They didn't see the woman who stayed up all night when fever burned through their bodies, or who worked double shifts to keep food on the table. They saw someone who misplaced her glasses, someone who folded a shirt too slowly, someone to laugh at. And yet, through every humiliation, my sister's eyes remained steady. She didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't sigh. She watched. And her silence was not agreement. It was fuel. I didn't know it then, but each time they humiliated me, she was storing truth, storing anger, storing the courage I could not find. Have you ever faced humiliation so sharp that silence felt like the only shield you had? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to share where you're watching from. Knowing how far these words travel reminds me that even in silence, we are never truly alone. There is always a moment when the quiet pain becomes too heavy to carry, when the silence that has swallowed you starts to crush the last piece of dignity left inside. For me, that moment came not with a scream, but with a whisper I wasn't meant to hear. I was passing down the hallway, slow steps against the wooden floor, when I caught their voices spilling from the kitchen. They weren't even trying to lower their tones anymore. They spoke freely, carelessly, as if I were deaf, as if I didn't exist at all. "She's holding us back," my brother muttered. "We can't keep this up. She doesn't contribute anything. She's just a weight on all of us." I stopped, my hand gripping the wall for balance. The words froze me, but it didn't end there. My daughter-in-law's voice cut through sharp and cold. "We should just put her in a home. Somewhere far. Somewhere permanent. She's nothing but a burden now." The word burden echoed in my head like a bell tolling for my own funeral. My knees trembled, and for a moment I thought they might give way entirely. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady my breath, but every inhale was laced with fire. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. And then came my son's voice, the boy I once held to my chest, the boy who once whispered, "I love you," Mom before falling, asleep. He didn't defend me, he didn't stop them. He simply sighed and said, "It's true. She does nothing, she's become useless." That word, useless, stabbed deeper than all the others. useless, as though the decades I had given, the sacrifices I had made, the love I had poured into every corner of this family, could be erased with a single cruel word. My breath caught in my throat, and I slid down the wall, my body shaking like a leaf in the wind. I bit my lip hard enough to draw blood, desperate, not to let a sob escape and give them the satisfaction of hearing my pain. At that moment, I felt something inside me crack. It wasn't just sadness anymore, it was betrayal, sharp and relentless, pressing down until I could barely hold my head up. I wanted to storm into the kitchen, to shout, to remind them of everything I had done. I wanted to throw every sacrifice in their faces to make them see me again. But I didn't move. My voice was trapped, my strength drained. I sat in silence, invisible in the very home I had built with my hands. But just when I thought I had been erased completely, another voice broke through the cruelty. My sister's, firm, unwavering, and filled with a fire I had not seen in years. "Enough," she said, her tone cutting through their laughter like a blade. The entire kitchen went silent. Chairs scraped against the floor as heads turned, stunned by her defiance. My heart leapt, a fragile spark flickering inside the ashes of my despair. She stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "Do you even hear yourselves?" she demanded. "Do you realize what you're saying? This is the woman who raised you, who sacrificed for you, who gave you everything she had, and you dare to call her useless. You dare to speak of her as if she's a burden." The silence in that room was deafening, heavier than any noise. For the first time, they looked shaken. For the first time, I saw their smugness falter. I couldn't move. My body was still pressed against the wall, my hands trembling, but my heart was pounding for another reason now. My sister had spoken the words I had been too broken to say. She had done what no one else dared. She shattered the illusion of their cruelty, forcing them to see me not as a shadow, but as the woman I truly was. And in that instant, everything shifted. The balance of power in the room was no longer theirs. It was hers. And through her, it became mine again. If this story moves you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps these truths reach more people who feel silenced in their own homes. I watched from the hallway as my sister stood tall, her voice steady, her presence commanding. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't begging. She was declaring a truth they could no longer hide from. And though my body shook with the weight of their betrayal, my soul felt something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. For the first time in what felt like years, I realized I was not alone. Someone still saw me. Someone still remembered who I was. And in her fire, I felt my own begin to flicker again. They had tried to break me. They had nearly succeeded. But my sister refused to stay silent. And in that refusal, she reminded me that I could still stand. The moment my sister's voice sliced through their cruelty, something in the air shifted. I could see it in their faces. Their smugness cracked, their confidence faltered. They weren't used to being challenged, least of all by her. For so long she had stayed, quiet, listening, watching, as they pushed me further into the shadows. I had mistaken her silence for agreement, but now I realized it was preparation. My sister had been carrying something all along, and when she finally spoke, it wasn't just anger. It was truth. Her eyes swept across the room, sharp and unyielding. "You speak of her as if she is nothing," she said, her voice trembling, not from fear, but from rage barely contained. "But do you even know what she has done for you? Do you remember the years she worked 2 jobs just so you could eat? Do you remember who paid your school fees when you were drowning in debt? Do you remember the nights she stayed awake by your side while you were sick, praying over you, holding you, refusing to let you go? Their silence deepened, but my sister wasn't finished. She stepped closer to the table, her hands pressing against it, as if to steady herself, though her voice was steady enough to shake the walls. You call her useless? She is the reason you stand here today. She is the reason you have this roof, these walls, this life. She carried the weight of this family when no one else would. And now you dare to treat her as if she is a burden? Every word felt like lightning striking the room. My heart pounded as I listened from the hallway, my chest rising and falling with a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. I wanted to speak, to thank her, to tell her that her words were healing wounds carved deep into my soul. But I stayed, still my throat thick with tears. And then she revealed the truth I hadn't known she carried. Do you think I don't know? She said, her voice quieter now but sharper, cutting through the room like glass. I've seen the papers. I know the plans you've been making behind her back, selling this house, taking her name off the documents, trying to declare her incapable so you can push her away and take everything she has worked for. The room exploded into chaos. My son stood abruptly, his face pale. My daughter-in-law sputtered, denying, her voice shaking. My brother slammed his hand on the table, demanding to know how she knew. And my sister stood firm, unflinching, like a mountain against a storm. You thought I wouldn't find out, she continued. You thought you could whisper in dark corners, make your plans, and she would never know. You thought she was too weak, too silent, too broken to fight back. Well, you were wrong, because she is not alone. She has me, and I will not let you erase her. I will not let you strip her of everything she built with her own hands. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. My knees nearly gave way, not from despair this time, but from the overwhelming flood of gratitude. She knew. She had known all along, and she had been preparing, gathering proof, waiting for the moment to lay bare the betrayal I had only suspected. I remembered the late nights she had come to my room, speaking softly, asking questions, writing things down. I thought she was only keeping me company, easing my loneliness. But now I understood. She had been listening, recording, piecing together the puzzle of their schemes. She had been carrying the weight of truth so that when the moment came, she could use it to defend me. The looks on their faces were priceless. My son, the boy I had once cradled, stared at his sister with a mixture of fear and fury. My daughter-in-law's lips trembled as she searched for excuses, her mask slipping with every second. My brother tried to regain control, but his voice shook, betraying his guilt. For the first time, they weren't in command. They weren't the ones defining who I was. The truth had stripped them bare, and they had nowhere to hide. In that moment, I felt a surge of strength return to me. My sister wasn't just speaking for me. She was reminding me of who I was. I was not useless. I was not a burden. I was the woman who built, who sacrificed, who endured. And now, with her at my side, I felt something I thought I had lost forever, the power to fight back. Her final words that night still echo in my memory. She looked each of them in the eyes and said, "If you ever dare to touch her, to erase her, to strip her of what is hers, I will burn your lies to the ground. I have the truth, and I am not afraid to use it." The silence that followed was suffocating, but this time, it wasn't mine, it was theirs. For the first time, they were the ones shrinking in their seats, their confidence crumbling under the weight of truth. Have you ever witnessed a moment when truth shattered lies and changed everything? Share your story in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It amazes me how far these words can travel, carrying strength to those who need it most. The room had never felt so heavy. My sister's words lingered in the air like smoke after a fire, choking the certainty out of everyone who had mocked me, erased me, humiliated me. For years they had spoken freely, secure in their cruelty, confident that no one would challenge them. But now, the silence that followed her revelation was not mine. It was theirs. They were the ones shrinking under the weight of exposure. My son was the first to break. His voice, once sharp and commanding, trembled. "That's not true," he stammered. "You don't know what you are talking about." But his eyes betrayed him. He couldn't hold her gaze. He looked at the table, at the floor, at anything except the sister who had pulled the mask from his face. My daughter-in-law tried to fill the space with her usual poison. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're exaggerating. We never planned to hurt her. We were just thinking of what was best." But even as she spoke, her hands trembled. Her words, once sharp enough to cut me, now rang hollow, exposed as lies too weak to hold against the truth. And my brother, oh my brother. His fury boiled over. He slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing through the kitchen like a thunderclap. "You don't belong in this conversation," he shouted at my sister. "You've always been the one meddling, stirring trouble, acting holier than thou. Stay out of this." But his rage was not power. It was desperation. The louder he shouted, the clearer it became. He was afraid. Afraid of her words. Afraid of her proof. Afraid that the house of cards they had built was finally collapsing. I stood in the hallway, watching, my heart racing, my breath shallow. For so long I had been invisible in this home. For so long they had spoken as though I wasn't there. But now, because of her, I felt seen. I felt that every humiliation, every whispered conversation, every dismissal had finally been dragged into the light. My sister didn't waver. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even flinch when they tried to deny her. She simply stood taller, her eyes burning with a steady fire. "Don't lie to me," she said quietly, but her words carried more weight than their shouts. "I've seen the documents. I've heard the recordings. I know exactly what you've been planning. You wanted to strip her of her home, her dignity, her life. But you forgot something. You forgot me. And I will not let you succeed." The room fell still again. My granddaughter fidgeted in her chair, her usual smirk gone, her laughter silenced. She wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. For the first time I saw her guilt flicker. Perhaps she hadn't understood the depth of what was happening. Perhaps her cruelty had been the thoughtless cruelty of youth. But now she sat in silence, confronted by the weight of what her parents had plotted. It was in that silence that I realized something important. They weren't invincible. They weren't untouchable. They weren't the powerful voices I had believed them to be. Without their lies, without their united front, they were small. Smaller than the truth my sister carried. Smaller than the strength she had revealed in standing for me. I felt tears prick my eyes, but not the tears of humiliation that had stained my cheek so many nights. These were different. These were tears of something I hadn't felt in years. Vindication. For so long, I had been made to doubt myself, to believe their words, to accept their treatment as truth. But in this moment I saw clearly. The lies had always been theirs, not mine. My sister turned her gaze toward me. For the first time that night, our eyes met across the room, and in her look I felt everything. Her strength, her love, her defiance, her promise that I was not alone. I pressed my trembling hand to my chest, as if to hold my heart steady, and whispered silently, "Thank you." But the fallout was only beginning. My son muttered about lawyers. My daughter-in-law hissed about family loyalty and keeping things private. My brother threatened to cut ties, to walk away, to disown us both. But their words no longer held power. They had already been exposed, and the more they scrambled, the more they revealed their guilt. The house that once suffocated me now echoed with their panic, their fear, their unraveling. And though I stood quietly in the hallway, I no longer felt like a shadow. I felt like the storm had shifted, and for once it wasn't swallowing me. It was swallowing them. If you've ever seen the truth rip away lies and expose what was hidden, you know how powerful that moment can be. Like this video and subscribe so more voices like mine can be heard, and tell me in the comments if you've ever witnessed a moment when silence finally broke and changed everything. When the shouting finally quieted and the lies had nowhere left to hide, the silence that filled the house was different from all the others I had endured. This silence did not erase me. It did not make me feel invisible. It was a silence heavy with truth, one that wrapped around me like a shield instead of a chain. For the first time in years, I felt as though the walls of this house weren't closing in. They were opening. I watched them scramble, trying to stitch together excuses, trying to rebuild the illusions my sister had torn down. But it was too late. The truth had already cut through every mask, every pretense. They looked smaller now, stripped of their confidence, exposed for what they truly were, people afraid of the very woman they had tried to erase. And me? I no longer felt like a shadow. I no longer felt like a burden. I felt the weight of years of humiliation beginning to lift from my shoulders. It was not gone, not yet, but it was shifting, piece by piece, as though my sister's words had unlocked the strength that had been buried beneath their cruelty. I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who could run a household, balance bills, bake cakes, solve problems, and still have the strength to hold a crying child through the night. That woman had not vanished. She had been buried under silence and mockery, under dismissals and cruel laughter, but she was still here. I was still here. And with every breath, I could feel her stirring again. My sister placed a hand on my shoulder that night, firm and grounding. "You are not alone," she whispered, and the words echoed louder than any insult I had endured. They weren't just words of comfort. They were a declaration, a vow, a reminder that even in the darkest moments someone had stood by me, waiting for the right moment to remind me of my worth. I sat in my chair by the window, later that evening, the same chair where I had once felt like a prisoner staring out at the world I thought had forgotten me. But this time I didn't feel forgotten. I felt alive. The stars above seemed brighter, the air lighter, as if the universe itself had conspired to give me back what I thought was lost. Dignity. They tried to erase me. They tried to make me small. They tried to make me believe I was useless, invisible, a burden. But they failed. Because in the moment when I was closest to breaking, my sister stood up, and through her strength, I remembered my own. The fallout of her revelation continued. My son barely met my eyes, shame written across his face even when he tried to mask it. My daughter-in-law kept her distance, her words clipped, no longer daring to spit venom so openly. My brother retreated into silence, his bluster shattered, his power gone. Even my granddaughter, who had once giggled at my mistakes, looked at me differently now, hesitant, uncertain, no longer so quick to laugh. But the real change was inside me. For the first time, I did not measure myself by their opinions. I did not shrink when they looked my way. I sat straighter, breathed deeper, and carried myself not as a relic of the past, but as a woman who had survived, who had endured, and who had been reminded that survival is its own kind of power. That night, as I closed my eyes, I whispered to myself, You are not useless. You are not forgotten. You are still here. And for the first time in so long, I believed it. The road ahead would not be easy. I knew their resentment would not vanish overnight. I knew there would still be whispers, still be cold shoulders, still be moments designed to push me back into silence. But I also knew this. I would never again sit in the shadows, believing their lies. I had been defended, I had been seen, and that had reignited a strength that could not be erased again. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I folded my blanket neatly, placed my slippers by the bed, and looked into the mirror. For a long moment, I stared at the lines on my face, the years etched into my skin. And instead of seeing weakness, I saw survival. I saw proof of every battle fought, every sacrifice made, every humiliation endured, and the strength that had carried me through it all. I walked into the kitchen with steady steps. They looked at me, surprised, perhaps expecting me to avoid them. But I didn't. I pulled out a chair, sat at the table, and poured myself a cup of tea. I didn't speak. Not yet. I didn't need to. My presence was enough. And for once, they didn't ignore it. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their guilt thick in the air. And in their silence, I found my victory. They had tried to break me, but I was still here. They had tried to erase me, but I remained. And as long as I breathed, I would no longer let their cruelty define me. Tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. It fills me with strength to know how far these words can travel. And if this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe. Every bit of support helps these stories reach those who need them most. When I look back at everything that was said, everything that was done, it feels almost like another lifetime. As if the woman sitting silently in the corner, swallowing humiliation and pretending not to hear, wasn't me at all. But it was me. I carried the weight of those words. I lived in the silence of those rooms. I felt the sting of being called useless, the ache of being treated like a burden, the suffocating loneliness of watching life unfold around me while I was left behind. And yet, here I stand, not broken, not erased, but stronger than I ever thought I could be. What changed? It wasn't the cruelty of others that defined me. It wasn't their dismissal, their whispers, or their schemes. What changed was the moment truth found its voice, the moment someone refused to let lies stand unchallenged. My sister's courage lit a spark inside me, and in that spark, I found faith again, not just faith in family, but faith in myself. I'd forgotten the strength I carried, forgotten the sacrifices I made, forgotten that every line on my face was not weakness, but testimony. Each wrinkle is a story of love given, of nights endured, of battles fought quietly with no applause. I had let their words make me small, but the truth is I was never small. I was only silenced. There is a power in being reminded that your worth does not vanish with age, nor does it expire with time. Worth is not something others can grant or take away. It is something carved deep into the soul by every choice, every sacrifice, every act of love. I used to think my best years were behind me, that I had nothing left to offer. But the truth is, I had only stopped believing. And when belief returns, when someone reminds you of who you are, it is like breathing again after being underwater too long. I realized then that family is not defined by blood alone. Blood may bind us, but it is love, loyalty, and truth that reveal who truly belongs at your side. Those who plotted against me, who mocked me, who tried to push me aside, they shared my blood but not my heart. And those who stood for me, who carried the truth when I was too weak to speak, they carried something greater than blood. They carried faith, courage, and love. and that is what matters in the end. Life has a way of breaking us down in silence. The world whispers that we are finished, that we have no more to give, that our value is measured by what others think we can still produce. But faith says otherwise. Faith reminds us that the breath in our lungs is proof of purpose, that the scars we carry are not marks of defeat, but signs of survival. Faith whispers louder than doubt, and it tells us, you still matter, you still have a voice, you still have a reason to rise. I may not have the strength of youth, but I have something greater. I have endurance, I have wisdom, I have stories carved into my bones, lessons written in every step I take. They tried to erase me, but I will not be erased. They tried to take my voice, but I will not be silenced. I am not a burden. I am not useless. I am a woman who has endured storms and still found the strength to stand. And that is a victory no one can take away. To anyone listening now who has felt invisible, who has been made to believe they are less than they are, I want you to remember this. Silence does not mean absence. Being overlooked does not mean you have lost your worth. Sometimes the people closest to you may fail to see it. Sometimes they may even try to strip it away. But the truth will always outlive the lies. And one voice, one act of courage can change everything. If you cannot find that voice around you, let it begin with your own. Stand, speak, and remind the world who you are. What my sister did was more than defend me. She reminded me that even when the world seems deaf to your worth, faith can still rise. Truth can still break chains, and dignity can still be reclaimed. That is the gift she gave me. And that is the gift I hope these words give to someone else who needs them. So today, I do not walk in shame. I do not sit in silence. I walk with my head higher, my shoulders straighter, my faith stronger. I know who I am, and I will not let anyone rewrite my story again. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach more people who feel silenced and forgotten. And stay close, because in the next video I will share what happened when a mother uncovered a secret that had been buried for decades. A truth that not only shattered her family, but also rebuilt her life in ways no one could have imagined. You won't want to miss it.